Just how did the Taliban take control of Afghanistan so swiftly, even after the US invested 20 years of effort into the country?
What you are looking at right now is Taliban fighters inside the presidential palace.
Advised me to get away.
American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
This is a really complicated conflict with tons of historical baggage. If you're not sure where to start, hopefully this video will give you a quick overview of what's happened in Afghanistan. So what happened in Afghanistan in the past month? On August 12, US military reports estimated that Kabul could fall to the Taliban in 90 days, with the group swiftly taking over cities since the announcement of US withdrawal in April. That weekend, on August 16, the Taliban took over Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, and declared an end to the 20-year war. The Afghan president Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The US embassy in Afghanistan shut down all its operations and began to evacuate the country. So, a quick backstory on who the Taliban are. The Taliban was formed in 1994. They gained influence after the Soviet Union, who were in Afghanistan from late 1979 to 1989, were driven out by the Mujahideen, Muslim guerrilla fighters fighting against non-Muslim armies. Many members of the Taliban were in fact former Mujahideen members. Civil war broke out in the country after the Soviet Union left, and the Taliban vowed to restore stability to the country by enforcing a strict interpretation of the Sharia law. By September 1996, Kabul was captured, and the Taliban declared Afghanistan an Islamic emirate. Music and television were banned. People convicted of murder and adultery were publicly executed. Women were not allowed to leave the house unless they were accompanied by a male relative. And they were not allowed to work. And girls were not allowed to attend school. So why did the US invade Afghanistan in 2001? The Taliban were in power in Afghanistan. Terrorist group Al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden were taking refuge in the country and were quite chummy with the Taliban. Then, this happened.
You see the two towers, a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
Following the attack, the US demanded that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden. They refused. And so the US led a coalition to target the Taliban and Al-Qaeda with military strikes, starting the 20-year war. By November 2001, the US-led forces had taken over Kabul, chasing the Taliban out. An interim government was put in place. On May 1, 2003, the US announced an end to major combat in Afghanistan. The first democratic Afghan elections were held. The US shifted from combat to stabilizing, and they tried to install a Western-style government. But this proved difficult in a country stricken by decades-long conflict. And while the Taliban were driven out of Kabul, they were never completely quelled, regrouping and solidifying their influence in rural regions of the country. Skirmishes continued as the war fell in and out of the news cycle. Fast forward to May 2011.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda. This is the beginning, but not the end of our effort to wind down this war.
Why did the US decide to withdraw? In June 2011, then President Barack Obama announced an accelerated timetable for the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan, saying that the US had largely achieved its goals by disrupting Al-Qaeda's operations and killing many of its leaders. The operations in Afghanistan were becoming quite costly. It had been the longest war America has ever been involved in. The agreement to withdraw US forces was first established by the Trump administration in February 2020, with the deadline set initially at May 1st. On the final deadline of August 31st, President Biden said that the US withdrawal is also about ending an era of major military operations to remake other countries, of using its military to try to build democratic societies in places that had never had them. The US withdrawal has sowed doubts on its security commitments to its allies. Among its critics, the Chinese government has portrayed the US as a weak and unreliable partner, warning the self-ruled island of Taiwan that the US is not to be trusted. Domestically, the majority of the American public are in support of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, but many of them believe that the Biden administration had sorely mishandled the evacuation, and that the US intervention for the past 20 years had been for nothing. How did the Taliban gain control of the country so quickly, even before US troops fully left? Some analysts say that a good understanding of rural terrain and viciousness are reasons for the Taliban's enduring strength. For years, the Taliban was slowly gaining momentum and territories in rural Afghanistan, armed largely with weapons left by Soviet troops. By 2017, about half the population were reported to be living in areas either controlled by the Taliban or where the Taliban were openly present. From August 6, the Taliban had made more rapid advances across the country. Some areas were taken by the government by force, but in other areas, the Afghan National Army withdrew without a shot being fired. One reason for Afghanistan's quick fall, despite all the money and resources put into fortifying the country, was a demoralized and corrupt military. In February 2020, an agreement between the US and the Taliban confirmed a full American withdrawal. This led to a demoralized military, according to US officials and Afghan military officials. Conditions within the military deteriorated, made worse by a long history of corruption, desertion, and high casualties. Many Afghan officers also claimed that they had not received salaries in months. What does the Taliban takeover mean for Afghanistan? Well, it remains to be seen. The Taliban has been a lot more savvy with the media recently. Their spokesperson has been giving interviews with various international media outlets, projecting a more progressive version of the Taliban. But many are skeptical.
Women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is in work or other activities, because women are a key part of society. And we are guaranteeing all their rights within the limits of Islam.
There are also concerns that the country will once again harbor terrorists. Taliban officials insist that they will prevent any group from using Afghan soil as a base for attacks. What does this mean for Singapore? In an interview, Jasminder Singh from RSIS said that the authorities in the region would need to be vigilant. With the return of the Taliban, there could be a resurgence of political Islam in Southeast Asia, as some Islamist groups might be encouraged to follow their suit. What will happen to the Afghans who have left the country? After the Taliban took over Kabul, astounding images of people trying to flee emerged. Many of them are Afghans who have worked with the foreign military forces and fear punishment by the Taliban. By the agreed deadline of August 31st, more than 123,000 civilians have been evacuated from Kabul airport. But it's currently unclear exactly how many Afghans have been airlifted out of the country. Figures from the US and the UK indicate that there were about 81,000 Afghans or other foreign nationals. Many of them were transported to emergency processing centers in various countries. From there, they will be processed and flown to further military bases. On August 27, Singapore sent the A330 tanker aircraft to transport refugees from Qatar to Germany. And if figures from 2020 are any indication, most of the refugees could end up in neighboring Pakistan or Iran. The US has not announced the exact number of refugees it will let in, but they have authorized $500 million for unexpected urgent refugee and migration needs. Other European countries have also indicated that they will provide sanctuary to some refugees, but many of them have not specified numbers or plans. Again, this video doesn't cover every nuance of the complex Afghan conflict. The country's instability can be traced back to the Soviet War in 1979, and there are dozens of actors involved. But hopefully, you now have a better overview of the issue. A bitter war in the 21st century of humankind and its consequences, which will continue to unravel in the months and years to come.